The East African tradition of the Maasai tribe is to greet one another with the words Kasirian Ingera, which is Swahili for, so how are the children? In that community, the well-being of their children is the highest priority. If you are interested in participating in thought-provoking conversations about the well-being of children and families, please tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. to Fresh Start Today on 860 AM WNOV. Together, we can save our children. Good afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start Today with your hosts, Jermaine Reed and Sean Roby, and it is a lovely day outside. Thought we were going to have a little bit more snow on yesterday and today, but it's looking really nice out there, pretty warm. There's a lot going on, and we're going to be talking today with a civil rights icon, Dr. James Swerg, who is a native of Wisconsin. He's from the Appleton area and one of the original freedom fighters, so we can't wait to get him on the show. And we're going to be talking about the trauma of freedom and equality, and certainly we're going to be connecting that to child welfare and what happens not just on a local level but throughout the nation. And so we certainly would like to invite you all to join this conversation. 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. And I know Mr. Roby has a couple community announcements that he would like to share with you.
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. The Milwaukee Child Welfare Partnership Council will be hosting their next meeting on March 18th, and that's going to be at 635 North 26th Street.
What is the Partnership Council?
The Partnership Council is a citizens review panel for Child Protective Services, and they look at child welfare policy and whatnot, and they meet I believe it's every other month. And it's open to the public. So if you want any more information about that, you can give them a call at 414-343-5500. Then also in May, we have the Color of Child Welfare, and that's going to be our conference here in Milwaukee, and that's going to be at the
Crowne Plaza Hotel out there by the airport.
Oh, and this is going to be a phenomenal conference. We have some wonderful, wonderful speakers who are going to be presenting at the conference, and these presenters have been directed or impacted directly or indirectly by the foster care system.
Yeah, most of those presenters were actually in foster care. You're talking about doctors and
judges.
We have educators
Mm-hmm.
and social workers. Just a number of folks who know firsthand what it's like to be in the foster care system, and they have achieved a great degree of success in their lives in spite of what that experience was. And so hopefully, if you know a black child who's in foster care, or maybe perhaps you were in foster care, maybe you have a child who's in foster care, your grandchildren in foster care, the little boy next door is in foster care, this would be a great opportunity to get out and come together and really focus on some of the very unique needs and issues that confront black folks who deal with child welfare. And that's not just the children, but it's also the staff persons, case managers, the foster parents and service providers, just a number of folks who have some unique needs. And so this will be a great opportunity. That's on May 17th. If you want to know a little bit more about that, you can give us a call at 414-351-1100, extension 150, 414-351-1100, extension 150. And there is a fee for it, but we do have a sliding fee available for individuals who may need that. So give us a call at Fresh Start at 414-351-1100. And if you also would like to be a foster parent, you've been thinking about it, you think that you can offer some valuable service, give us a call at 414-351-1100, 414-351-1100. So we're getting ready be talking very shortly with Dr. James Swerg. And as I mentioned, he's from the Appleton area, and we all know that we're on the heels of Black History Month. And, you know, during that time of the year, countless of businesses and communities take time out to celebrate the many contributions of African Americans. And I'm hoping that spirit can stay alive throughout the year. I hate the Christmas effect, as I call it, you know, where you focus on it's December and everybody excited, everybody happy, and they waiting on the 25th, and then on the 26th, everything goes right back to business as usual. But we're on the heels of Black History Month, and I want to carve out some additional time to not only focus on the contributions that so many of our black leaders have made throughout the world and throughout the United States and throughout history, but also to take time to acknowledge and appreciate the contributions that so many non-black folks have made to our freedom and to just to our success as a people. And today we have on the phone Dr. James Swerg, and I don't think that white folks often get a lot of acknowledgement for their role in the civil rights movement, their role even in abolishing slavery, because as great as Harriet Tubman was and leading all of those individuals, slaves, to freedom, she couldn't have done it without the benevolence and the support of some very good, righteous white folks. So I want to say thank you to their legacy. And so good afternoon, Dr. Swerg.
Oh, gosh, call me Jim.
Jim.
Jermaine.
I can remember. Jim.
My doctorates are honorary only, and so I'm Jim.
How you doing, Jim?
Or Reverend, I don't care. I'm doing fine, thanks.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for carving time out of your very busy schedule to be a part of this conversation here. I was sitting here just thinking about civil rights and thinking about contributions of folks like yourself, and it's just an honor to have someone who represents a very important part of our American history, not just black history, but American history, to be on the phone with us. So thank you again, Jim.
You're very welcome.
Now, you know what? You are from the Appleton, Wisconsin area.
Correct.
Do you get back up there often?
Not very often, although I was back there in June.
In June?
That's when Lawrence gave me their honorary doctorate.
Okay.
Along with John Lewis.
Oh, okay. Congressman Lewis was there as well.
Yeah,
I think
he was their commencement speaker.
Really? Okay, because I think I saw that in the Journal Sentinel as well. They covered that story.
That's correct.
Okay, and so what was it like going back to Appleton?
It's changed a lot. It has grown dramatically. The downtown had changed. I mean, there were areas like the university that were the same, and some of the old streets that we used to live on, and things. Some of those were the same, but the biggest thing that stuck out that hadn't been there when I was growing up was the diversity of the population.
Oh, wow.
It had been lily white when I was growing up.
Okay. Well, let's go back to the early 60s or late 50s, early 60s when you were living in Appleton, Wisconsin. As stated before, you were one of the original freedom riders. And for the young audience who's listening on their way from school or what have you, can you just tell us what was a freedom rider?
Well, let me clarify. I was not one of the original freedom riders. The original freedom ride was a core group of 13 black and white individuals, some students, some very elderly.
Okay.
I was on the first bus to continue the ride after the core folks abandoned their ride and flew off to New Orleans.
Okay, so you're part of the Diane Nash group.
That is correct.
Okay.
I was in Nashville at the time.
You're in Nashville at the time. Okay, so how did you get involved in that whole civil rights effort, being from Appleton, Wisconsin?
Well, to make it very quick, when I got to college, I had an African-American roommate and got to see and hear firsthand the physical and verbal abuse and discrimination that he encountered. He never responded in kind, and that kind of amazed me because I grew up with a very short fuse, and I kind of took him to task one day as to why didn't he, give him what for. And he went over to his dresser and pulled out a copy of Dr. King's Stride Towards Freedom, which, of course, is the story of the Montgomery bus boycott. And in it, Dr. King sets down his 6 principles of nonviolence and the 6 steps towards social change, bringing about social change. And Bob said, read this, and then we'll talk about it. So I read it, and kind of just went, wow, okay, so they pulled this off, this nonviolent business. I don't really understand it, but Bob's position was, if you respond in kind, all it will do is escalate the problem. Violence breeds violence. Hatred breeds hatred. I have chosen not to respond that way and to respond at a higher plane, to act at a higher plane. So I said, okay, more power to you. I went to a small school in southern Wisconsin, Beloit. We only had approximately 1,300 students, 6 of which were African American. During my sophomore year, Beloit established an exchange program with Fisk University. And one of the African American fellows from Beloit went down to Fisk the first semester, and then a female from Fisk came up the second semester. There was no exchange the first semester of my junior year, but Bob and I were living together off campus, and of course I was continuing to witness what he was undergoing, and I was a sociology major, and I got to thinking, I wonder how I would feel if I was in the minority. Would I be treated nice? Would I be able to respond the way Bob had? So anyway, I applied for and was accepted to be an exchange student that second semester of my junior year. So I went to Fisk, not, number one, very naive about segregation in general and segregation in the South. This was the late 50s, early 60s. Television was still pretty new. As I was growing up, we got very little news from the South and what was going on. So anyway, I arrived at Fisk very naive. And the very first day I went over to the Union and was going to get a hamburger and a shake, and got it, and a young couple invited me to go over and join them. And as we talked, we just really enjoying one another, and the twist was in, and I went out and showed them the Midwest twist and made an ass out of myself, but we had a really good time, and we were enjoying each other, so I thought, wow, hey, why don't we go take in a movie this afternoon? And they looked at me and they said, Jim, we can't go to a movie together. The movie theaters are segregated. Not only can we not enter together, we can't sit together, we can't use the same restroom, and we can't use the same snack bar. And my immediate reaction was, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But then they had been involved in the sit-ins of the previous year, and they invited me to attend a meeting at one of the faculty members' homes, who was the liaison to the students from Fisk that were in the movement, and that they were planning to start a campaign to integrate the movie theaters. So that was my very first meeting that evening, and then that weekend there was going to be a demonstration, and I went down to investigate it, stood across the street for about a half an hour. Finally went across the street. The kids were just standing there, and I went up to the one and asked them what they were trying to accomplish, because they weren't singing any songs. They weren't carrying any placards, nothing. They were dressed very nicely. And I was referred to their spokesman. And when I went and spoke with him, he invited me to come back to their church and talk with him, and that was John Lewis.
Okay. Congressman John, and he was a part of CORE. He was
he was there at Fisk, at Nashville, and he was one of the key leaders of the Central Committee. SNCC had not been formed at that point. The different locations were kind of literally individual. There wasn't that national scope at that point, but John was one of the key leaders, along with Diane, Bernard Lafayette, Jim Bevel in Nashville. Yeah, and he invited me to attend a workshop, and over a period of time of going to the workshops, listening to what was taking place, wrestling with the challenges of nonviolence and so forth over a period of time, I finally came to a point where I saw that it had relevance for my life, and I embraced it, and then became active in the workshops, and ultimately was invited to take part in the demonstrations.
So when you say the workshop, what do you mean by the workshops?
A workshop was in nonviolence. We were very gifted and very lucky in Nashville. James Lawson, a Methodist minister who King had sent specifically to Nashville to teach the kids nonviolence, had known, obviously, Kingian nonviolence, but he had also spent 4 years in India at Gandhian's Institute. So he brought not only his religious faith and knowledge of the Judeo-Christian tradition, but Kingian nonviolence and Gandhian nonviolence and examples thereof to our workshops. And the workshops were kind of two-part. One element was more almost like a religious service. There were the freedom songs, like hymns sung. Scripture passages were read. Testimonials were stated. The various elements or the principles might be discussed, a particular principle of nonviolence in that evening or something like that, and its relevance and how you might make it meaningful in your own life. But then the meat and potatoes of the workshop was a very dramatic, intense role play. And Jim would stage a situation similar to a demonstration downtown. They'd set up like the ticket taker's box, and how you would go up to that area and ask for a ticket and have your money and so forth. But also, they would have people serve as hecklers and call you every foul name in the book, hit you, kick you, spit on you, threaten you with cigarettes, and the concern was that you remain nonviolent. If you broke, you weren't going to demonstrate. You could still be part of the movement. I mean, you might make sandwiches for the kids when they came back, or distribute newsletters on campuses, we'd find something for a person to do if they wanted to be involved. But you weren't going to demonstrate if you didn't remain nonviolent.
Got you.
But those were the workshops, and it was one of these things where you didn't just go down and demonstrate. You had to go through the training and show that you were not just in the training, but ultimately when you'd start demonstrating that you would remain nonviolent. And of course, with experience, grew your depth of faith and your commitment to nonviolence, as it did with me. I was ultimately selected to be a member of the 24 Central Committee members from the various schools, and it was in that capacity that the group met to make the decision to continue the rides when CORE stopped, and I volunteered to be one of those to continue the ride. So that's what led me up to it. Long story.
Okay. So I'm thinking about your journey. You go from the north down to the south. You said you're a little naive in terms of what was going on that landscape as it relates to racism. And I'm wondering if you think that racism still manifests itself even in this era. Does racism look different depending on the era in which a person is living?
It certainly did then. It was much more overt in the South. It was more covert in the North. We didn't have any signs that said whites only or white waiting rooms. they didn't have places on the buses in Appleton that said for colored only or anything like that. Thank God some of that, the majority of that's changed, and then there's still a covert racism, certainly.
Now, do you think it was harder for you to confront and deal with racism and fighting for the equality of blacks than it was for, say, some of the other black demonstrators or civil rights activists during that time?
I don't know as I can really speak for anybody else, Jermaine. I came to see what finally made me move in the direction of nonviolence was I had grown up in the church and I had a basic faith, but in wrestling with the various scriptures that Jim shared with us and their relevance to my life, it just finally hit me one evening that the Gospels were the most powerful story of nonviolent direct action ever written, and that was Jesus Christ. Every element of, every principle of nonviolence he lived. There was the innocent suffering, there was the forgiveness, there was the attempt to make friends and to educate, and it was all there. And it just hit me and said, my God, Jim, you call yourself a Christian, live your faith, act it out. That was part of Jim's message was nonviolence has to be a way of life. It can't be something that you just turn on and off like a switch, because if that's all it is to you, sooner or later you're going to break. It has to change your life. And my life was changed in forever. I was never the same after that.
Okay. So I'm thinking about, we work in child welfare, and child welfare in America is predominantly Caucasians, predominantly white. If I look at locally what's going on here in the city of Milwaukee or Milwaukee County, 68.2% of the foster care community is African American. If you add in or factor in the Hispanic community, now you're talking around 80.2% or somewhere in that area.
Put in Native American and you'll make it higher.
Well, not in Milwaukee County, but it will be higher. Yeah, it will be slightly different. I think it's like 3%, in Milwaukee County. But depending on what part of the state you're living in, the Native American numbers are going to look a lot different. But there is disproportionality there, and it's concerning.
Absolutely.
But the workforce that is serving this minority population is like 80%, and this is an unofficial number here, 80% Caucasian. And so with that being said, I'm thinking about how no matter what time that we're living in, what era that we're living in, that racism has always been housed in government, whether it's city level, state level, federal level, policies, laws, institutional, structural racism. So you mentioned, racism may have looked differently, and I'm sure that it looked differently in the 60s, but there is this invisibleness or invisible factor that's connected to racism today, where it's a lot of institutional stuff that goes on. So I'm thinking about families that are served and by black families that are served by white social workers who I believe have good hearts. And so I'm thinking about you in your situation working for the equality and freedom and justice for black people during the 60s. Was it ever hard because you were going up against the same institutional racism, the culture of racism that governed the South, and maybe it looked differently, and it did look differently in the North, but it certainly was there. Was it harder for you? Because what did you have to deal with as a white man going back to a white community, or even your relationship with other white people who weren't a part of the civil rights movement? What was that like?
It was interesting because obviously if one has not had that, you want to share that experience. That was a mountaintop experience of my life, was my time in the movement. And the power of nonviolence and redemptive love was certainly a message I shared in my ministry. So it was there. But when I came back from the South, Of course, it was just summertime, and I needed to heal from my injuries. So that summer, I basically was healing, and did some speaking, mainly to service organizations in my hometown. But for an example, the first time I was ever asked to speak at my college regarding my experience was in 2005.
Wow.
Right.
So
Decades
there
later.
was that didn't want to discuss it. You know.
Wow.
It was very hard because I was so physically removed from my brothers and sisters of the movement. There were opportunities, and I took every one of them that I was asked to participate in those days, to go and be on a panel in Chicago at a Quaker gathering, and John was there, and Bernard, and Bill Harbour, my partner in the stand-ins, and every chance I got to share my experiences and my concerns, I tried to do. Like when I got back to college, it was just business as usual, with one exception, and that was that my former roommate's classics professor had quit because he was a Southerner and didn't like the faculty sending a note on to the Kennedys commending my actions.
Now, Jim, when you talk about the healing that you had to do, were you referring not only to the physical healing, but the emotional and psychological as well?
Yeah, I think the physical healing took first. Most of my teeth had fracture marks, and I was lucky to have a dentist for a father. He saved my teeth a lot longer than I didn't lose any right off the bat, but the repercussions of that. I had not been told what my injuries were, or if I was, with the extent of my concussion. I don't remember ever being told the extent. I mean, I know I had lacerations and, lots of bruises and so forth, and my back just killed me. We had left during finals week, and I was lucky in that Fisk being a private university and not a state university, I was not expelled like the kids at Tennessee State were. But I had gone to talk to the dean of students and my professors and said, if I live through this, can I come back and take my finals?
If you live through it.
Yes.
That's the type of cycle. Wow.
Well, that was a very realistic question. I was the only white male involved in Nashville. And being white, I was going to be the focal point of the violence. I had been in Nashville. I knew what to expect. And if anybody was going to get killed, it was probably going to be me. And that was discussed at length the night that we made the decision. Was, those of you who are volunteering understand you can expect jail, you can expect beatings, or you can expect to be killed. So if you have any apprehension about volunteering or not going, now's the time. Don't. But I was never so certain of anything in my life that my being on that bus was God's will, and that was the right place for me at that time in my life. And we all, every time we went down in a demonstration. You didn't know what was going to happen. I got threatened with a knife at my throat one time, and told if I ever came down again, they were going to stick me. And I came down the next night, and there the guy was. So you just, the power of nonviolence, the love of the people you're with, the strength it gives you, makes all that possible. And the emotional issues took much longer for me.
Right.
I disobeyed my parents by going. I had called them and told them that what I was going to do, and of course they were upset and very, demanded that I not go. And my God, I was wasting the money they spent on my education. And, how could I do this? My dad had heart attacks, and but it just, this was one of those things that. I guess I had hoped that maybe I'd get we disagree with you, son, but we love you, Godspeed type thing. And I did not get that. And we had some issues when I came back of accepting what I had done in disobeying them.
But there were others, too, a part of the movement whose families had disowned them.
Oh, yeah.
So when the summer was over with, they didn't have anywhere to go back to, right?
That's right.
Okay.
I mean, there were those that were totally supportive, and it varied. I mean, in some situations, the parents may have been working, if you will, for the man, and were concerned that if word got out that their kid had been involved, they'd lose their jobs, their home, whatever. And God who knows what the Klan might do if it was in a situation where white citizens' councils or clans were active.
Mm-hmm. So the question I have for you, Jim, is, the situation you were always trying to integrate, or integrate the interstate commerce or interstate transportation system, right?
Well, there had been a federal law passed that interstate transportation could not be segregated, and that was the initial plan of CORE, was to test that,
right,
and to see if the federal government would indeed enforce it.
So my question is, okay, so in that instance, you're dealing with this federal law that was passed, and you were testing that law. But
well, we were testing the state laws, of course, were still segregated.
Okay.
So was the federal government going to come in and say, we take precedent over you guys and your state laws?
Which the Kennedys didn't really want to do.
Absolutely not.
Okay. So to my point, what I'm trying to get to is, so you all were testing the status quo.
Yes.
And so the status quo on a local level that supported discrimination and segregation, and you were testing that. You were going up against the status quo, and I believe it was the Attorney General at the time, Robert Kennedy, who labeled you all as extremist.
Yes.
And so anytime you go up against whatever the status quo is, you can be looked at as a troublemaker. Mm-hmm. And
and especially me. I was a northern agitator.
Okay.
Right.
I came from outside the South. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a northern agitator, and I was hated even worse than the southern white kids that got involved, just because of that. But Bernard Lafayette, one time we were at Highlander Folk School talking to some kids from Ole Miss, as a matter of fact. And the one kid from Ole Miss said, "Well, you're nothing but a northern agitator."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, he's right. I am from the north. I don't know segregation. I didn't realize what it was, and now I'm down here agitating. And Bernard came over, and I had been talking to him about it and how it kind of bothered me. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Jim, just remember what an agitator does in a washing machine. It's what cleans up the mess." And from then on, I was very proud to be an agitator.
I'm proud to be an agitator too.
and you know what, Jim? I think that speaks to when you mentioned the agitator aspect and coming from a different environment and going into that chaotic environment and looking at trying to do what you can to make it better for everyone. Jermaine mentioned social workers, and this is actually National Social Workers Month, and just want to acknowledge those who may come from a different environment and go into a new environment and do everything that they can to help advance others' situations. So definitely want to give those accolades.
Well, what I want to do in a minute, take a break, Jim, and then I want to come back and talk briefly about May 20th, 1961. But I really want to talk about the impact of the trauma that's related to that experience and how that was handled or dealt with. Okay, so we're going to take a brief break. We'll be back in 60 seconds. You're listening to Fresh Start Today. This is your host, Jermaine Reed. This is Jermaine reporting from Fresh Start's WBCM studio with breaking news. Black children are flooding the local foster care system. Infant boys and girls coming straight out the womb, which means you probably have a black child in foster care, you are a black child in foster care, you're related to a black child in foster care, or you may even be a case manager or service provider for a black child in foster care. If so, then you don't want to miss the Color of Child Welfare Conference on May 17th. Fresh Start Family Services will host the only conference in the state that convenes to strictly focus on the needs of black children in foster care. This year's theme is Against All Odds, From Foster Care to Success. There will be national and local presenters like judges, authors, educators, politicians, and journalists who were formerly in foster care, and many others. Some of the workshop titles include Black Children's Journey in Foster Care, From Total Exclusion to Over-Inclusion, Psychotropic Drug Dependency in Black Children, Black Single Mothers and the Child Welfare System. There's so much to talk about. To join the conversation, register today for the Color Child Welfare Conference and Recruitment Fair on May 17th. Call 414-351-1100. That's 351-1100. Limited seats available. This is Jermaine signing off from Fresh Start WBCM, Wisconsin Black Children Matter. Back to you. Good afternoon. It's 3:40 in the afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start Today with your hosts, Jermaine Reed and Sean Roby. And we have a very special guest on the line, Dr. James Swerg, who was a freedom rider back in the 1960s. And we're talking about the trauma of freedom and equality. And we've asked Dr. or Jim to share with us a little bit about what happened on May 20th, 1961. And particularly, I'm going to want to know about, this what they call epigenetic inheritance. Is when trauma has been passed down biologically or passed down in your DNA from one generation to the next generation. And so we'll get into that trauma piece here. But Jim, can you tell us a little bit about what happened on May 20th, 1961 as relates to the civil rights movement?
Sure. Let me just very quickly say that when we had gotten to Birmingham, Paul Brooks and I were arrested immediately on the city limits, and taken to the Birmingham jail. The rest of the bus proceeded into Birmingham, where the regular riders got off the bus, and the remaining students, 8 students, were put under protective custody and also taken to jail. They were ultimately dumped out on the state line that first evening to try and make their way back to Nashville. Mm-hmm. Paul and I spent 2.5 days in the drunk transits with about 40 white Southern drunks in various stages of inebriation. And when we got out, Bernard Lafayette had brought the second group down, so we were now like 21 students. They were waiting for us at the bus station when Paul and I were finally released from jail. And so we spent that evening, the 19th to the 20th, sitting in the jail, sitting in the bus terminal, watching the Klan march back and forth outside the doors. We had been told that there was going to be a bus available to us the following morning. We had also learned that Governor Patterson's State Commissioner of Police, Floyd Mann, had guaranteed our safety to Montgomery. And the Montgomery Police Commissioner had said that he would provide security to us. So we didn't really sleep very much that night, but sure enough, about 10 o'clock on the 20th, we boarded a bus from Montgomery. This bus, of course, was not a normal interstate bus. We were the only people on the bus, along with some press. And because it was not an interstate bus, we didn't make any stops along the way, and the bus driver just put the pedal to the metal and 90 to 100 miles an hour all the way. We could see the security around us. There were helicopters and planes flying overhead, squad cars rotating from front to back, motorcycles, etc. And in this leg of the journey, I was John Lewis's seatmate, and John sat by the window, and I sat on the aisle. And actually, May 20th was beautiful in Alabama. The trees were green, and the flowers were starting to bloom, and I mean, we had a relaxing ride. John actually fell asleep for a while, and everything seemed fine until we hit the Montgomery city limits, and all the state vehicles, etc., disappeared, and we did not see any Montgomery police vehicles anywhere. So we entered Montgomery, and the closer we got to the bus terminal, as we got quite close, within 2-3 blocks, you realize, hey, there's no vehicular traffic here, and I don't see any pedestrians out there. And just as we were about to turn into the bus station terminal, Catherine Brooks noticed a squad car pulling out. And she said, there goes the police. And John said something like, oh, that's not a good sign. He was our spokesman for that leg, and we had called Reverend Abernathy and had asked if he could have some of his parishioners meet us at the bus station. We had tried this in Birmingham as well with Reverend Shuttlesworth. Our ideal was, if we could disperse into the community, we would not demonstrate upon our arrival in an attempt to avoid violence. And we would not return back to the bus station until the following morning. And then the whites would use the colored services, and the colored would use the white services. And we get on the next bus, and we go on to Jackson. So that was the plan. But as we got off the bus, we got our suitcases, but it was quiet, almost eerie quiet. There were, like I said, maybe a half dozen media folks around, and they had set up a mic for John to speak at, and he went up to address their questions, and as he did this, there was a fella, actually not standing too far from me. I didn't realize it, but I saw a picture later. He had a cigar in his mouth, and he went after a fellow with a parabolic mic, and he grabbed the mic, threw it to the ground, stomped on it, kind of gave the threatening look to the guy, and then he turned to one of the photographers, and he was trying to grab the guy's camera, and the fella fell to the ground, and with the strap around his, and that just seemed to be the cue. And suddenly, from behind the bus bays and up the driveways came this mass of humanity, just screaming, "Get them, kill them, get the niggers, kill them, get them." Just the hatred you could see in their eyes. You could see some weapons in their hands. And first thing was, we tried to get the girls into a taxi, see if we could get them out of there. But just initially, we had tried that when we realized that Abernathy wasn't able to get anybody in there. But when the group was advancing, I knew that we were going to get beaten, and I bowed my head and I asked God to be with me and to help me remain nonviolent and to forgive them. And in that instant, I had the most incredible religious experience of my life, because I felt absolutely at peace and just like I was enfolded in love, and knew that no matter what happened, whether I lived or whether I died, it was going to be okay. And I don't know if I muttered amen or thought amen, but I got grabbed then and pulled over the railing and thrown to the ground. I was able to get to all fours. I was going to try and get back to the group, and that's when I got kicked in my spine. I'm assuming that's when my vertebrae were broken, but I'm not sure. But I flew forward and fell on my back, and a boot came down in my face, and basically that's the last thing I remember.
So let me ask you this, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about this epigenetic inheritance, or this passing on of trauma. I mean, the civil rights activists, while they were heroes, they were also victims at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So this traumatic experience, when we think about social events like the Holocaust, Jewish Holocaust, slavery, when we think about 9/11, when we think about the Great Depression, the stock market crashing, or even children who are removed from their families, or a parent who loses their child to the system for whatever reason, it's a traumatic event. In that climate during the 60s and all that you all were dealing with and going up against, how did you all cope and deal with the toxic stress? You had to be anxious. There had to be individuals who were anxious, and there had to be some mental health stress or, depression. How did you all deal with that?
At the time, are you?
Yes, at the time, and then we'll talk about the residual effects.
While I was part of the movement, I've got to say that the love and the support and the strength of those brothers and sisters around you
mm-hmm.
Gave you the peace and the strength. Nonviolence is incredible, because a person can be whopping you upside the head and you love them and you forgive them.
Wow.
And it's real. It's real. That's the incredible thing. I look back at my time in the movement. Sure, I got beat up. Sure, I got knocked out. But it was the most incredible experience of my life. I have been so blessed. And I think, I can't speak for everybody, but I know those of us from Nashville felt that Nashville was special. The religious leaders we had that associated with us, Guy Carawan, who was our song leader, if you will, and his wife, who'd been an exchange student, everything about Nashville was, so many leaders came out of Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
I feel so humbled and blessed to have had them be part of my life and still be part of my life.
Right.
The negatives have all been overcome.
Okay.
And compared to that mountaintop experience, they just don't.
Compare.
I mean, yeah, I'm 76. Yeah, a lot of the injuries I had are now arthritic. My back hurts all the time. I can hardly move my thumbs. I lost more teeth, but damn, it was wonderful.
Okay.
I'd do it again in a minute.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this, because I think about Vietnam soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Those veterans went to Vietnam. They came home, and there was a lot of stuff that manifests. Domestic violence, drinking, a number of things.
Well,
Did folk?
Number one, people hated the war. You know, they were
Okay.
up against the war, and they certainly did not welcome these guys back when they came back. Unfortunately, many of them got hooked on drugs while they were over there.
Right.
So did civil rights activists have those highs and lows moments too when, after the victory, and going back home?
Oh, sure.
Wow.
Sure. I mean, I'm going back to Wisconsin, basically to a lily white town again, trying to share a message that just they don't understand.
It was foreign.
You know, it's absolutely foreign to them. And was that frustrating? Heck yeah. But
So did you have to live in two worlds in a sense, or try to adjust or modify?
I think the thing that happened, Jermaine, that helped me was when I got a chance to talk to students.
Okay.
All through the years. I mean, I've talked with everything from kindergartners, of course, to senior citizens, and especially talking with the younger kids. One of the things that I would do, and of course, living in Tucson these last number of years, it's much more diversified population down there. I'd take the kids and separate them by eye color.
Okay.
And then I'd make up some little story like, probably the green-eyed kids were the fewest, so those kids got to pick out what they wanted to have at lunch counter and got to play more on the playground and got the best toys and the unbroken crayons. And then the blue-eyes got something. And, of course, down there, there's a strong Hispanic population, so you got a lot of little brown-eyed kids. And so you'd say, okay, all you brown-eyed kids, you're in timeout. Oh, they moan and groan. That's not fair. And then we start talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel? And how would you feel if you with the blue eyes couldn't play with you with the brown eyes? But she's my best friend, And you could really start touching on, that's what it's all about, kids. That's what it's all about. Our diversity is a plus, not a minus.
Gotcha.
Right.
So let me ask you this, because I think you said something powerful that I know our engineer Keon has a very special story that he wants to share with you.
Okay.
But I often wonder, social workers who, let's just say white social workers who are working in the central city here in Milwaukee and urban communities all across the country, and then at the end of the day they go back to their families, their communities, their neighborhoods, and their living experience, their life experience is something totally different than the population they serve. I've often wondered if that was a challenge or a struggle, and you kind of helped me, just from your angle in terms of how you dealt with that. But you mentioned that you would do this all over again in light of all the violence that we see that's going on in the world, and some young children. The children that we work with, they just embody a lot of anger and frustration, and I can get it, or I think I can, being removed and separated from your family, uncertain about your future, working with folks who don't look like you, and you've been taught a certain way, you've been conditioned, you have your views about white people, about black people, about the system, so I kind of understand, but my question to you, given the pervasiveness of violence and aggression that's in the world, both intra-community and inter-community, you said you still would do it again?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
The thing that, seeing the violence and candidates saying we're angry and the diversion that some of them are talking about, just makes me sick.
Right.
But the thing that I am most sorry about happening over the years is the whole element of nonviolence has gone by the way. Violence seems to be the answer now. The old eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And that's tragic, because that power of nonviolence to bring about positive change, I feel deeply, is as strong and could do it today. I mean, we've had questions, with social media now and pocket phones. Could we have made a difference if we had those things available? Maybe, but so would the bad guys. So I don't know, but I guess my biggest disappointment is there are young activists coming up. You see them. I was delighted to see the new Eyes on the Prize Then and Now series that was on PBS, recently, and the only thing it seemed again was that the activists of today, I didn't see a whole lot of diversity with them. It seemed that the folks that produced that particular thing were really focusing on the African American. The summer after I was involved, the next summer after I graduated from college and had determined that I was going to go into seminary, I spent that summer out in South Dakota on the Rosebud Reservation, preaching in Indian churches on the weekends and working with the kids during the week. And it was such a change, because there was no impetus to make things better on the reservation. There was no spokesman saying, we deserve better. Our kids deserve a better education. There was a lot of drinking, alcoholism, and a lot of young kids having kids. That was a real eye-opener to me, that, boy, there's so much more still to do. And I have a granddaughter who's got cerebral palsy, and she's now 29 years old, and all the fights on her behalf. I mean, the very first school budget that gets cut is special ed. There's so many issues out there that need addressing.
You worked directly with Dr. King, and I remember reading some.
No, I only met Dr. King once.
Oh, you only met him once?
Yeah.
Were you? I think you were in the hospital. Correct me. Were you in the hospital when he came to Ralph Abernathy? Was it Ralph Abernathy Church? The day after your
I was in the hospital
right.
when he was there.
When he was there.
I met him in the following September.
Okay.
His organization awarded the 10 of us that continued the ride their Freedom Award for that year in Nashville.
Now, what's recorded is that Dr. King didn't necessarily agree with some of the tactics and the strategy of CORE as it relates to the Freedom Rides. And there's so many different – I've heard of two positions in terms of why he wasn't. And in fact,
why he wouldn't join the students?
Right, he wouldn't ride on the buses. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you know about that?
Well, at the time, I knew absolutely nothing, and I know that I think it was Eyes on the Prize, the original Eyes on the Prize. There were those that didn't speak very highly of him, thought he was the Lord, he was above getting involved. But Bernard Lafayette, who ultimately did indeed work with Dr. King for a number of years, has clarified that Dr. King was under some legal something back in Georgia, that if he had gotten involved, before he ever stepped on the bus, he would have been arrested. And so that was the determining factor. It wasn't that, I think probably maybe the way he said it. As I recall, if I want to, I think he's something to the effect that, if I want to pick my own Golgotha or something like that. Anyway, it was not well taken.
That he wanted to be the one to pick his day of death.
And he had such a gift with the English language that it just was very unfortunate because this was the students, guys, that continued it, not the adults. And there was an element that did not want either the adults coming in and taking over. There was also that element among the students, because by the time, after we got beaten up, and my interview from the hospital bed went literally around the world, the Freedom Rides were no longer just a core ride or a Nashville student ride. It was a nationwide, and had taken on. It was really the first nationwide demonstration that brought people from all backgrounds and got them involved. And that, I think, was an element of the rides that was very unique, because up until that point, I mean, there was Nashville doing its thing and Greensboro doing its thing, wherever it might have been. And then, of course, you saw Freedom Summer and again, students from all over coming and getting involved. But that was really, I think, from then on, if you go back and look at the 400-plus people that went on the rides, the vast majority of them were young people, students.
Young people. Yep. And so there seemed to have been some difference between what the older people thought should be done versus young people. And that happens, I think, even today in terms of, from a community perspective, in terms of how do we bring about change. You have a group of older people who feel this is the best strategy approach to address this problem. Then you have the younger. So when we're confronted with those kind of situations, and with the goal of improving the quality of life for folks, because if we can improve the quality of life for folks, then we can reduce the number of folks who are coming into foster care, a number of folks who are having some mental health issues. There's so many benefits to it. Can you give us some tips and strategies in terms of what you all did to bring about a consensus? Because John Lewis, Congressman Lewis, he was a fiery young man, and I think I remember reading something about the March on Washington and how he wanted to prepare.
He was very fiery there. Yeah, they made him change his words. The thing, interestingly enough, when John was in Nashville, he didn't talk a whole lot. The loudmouth there was Jim Bevel. He was our preacher, and when John talked, everybody shut up and listened. He was a man of few words in those days, but it was always, we got to go back, or if he wanted us to sing, he'd yell at us to sing. But the firebrand in those days was really Jim Bevel.
So what did you all do to bring consensus, to get the young folks to agree to the ways of the older folks or the elders, and the elders to embrace the thoughts?
For the most part, I think part of the thing was in Nashville, the three clergymen who were closest, the black clergymen, if you will, were the Reverend Kelly Miller Smith, in whose church we met, and that was our center point. And he was kind of the Nashville Dr. King, highly respected. One of these guys you could go talk to if something bothered you. C.T. Vivian, still around. He had the black newspaper at the time. Jim Lawson, of course, not only talked the talk, but he walked the walk. He was always there demonstrating with us. And then there was a younger fellow named Metz Rollins, and Metz, too, would get involved. So there was, if we were part of the idea of the workshop, after a demonstration, for instance, we would go back to the church and discuss it. What happened? Were there incidents of violence? Mm-hmm. What could we have done to alleviate that? what possible things might we do in the future. And usually, I mean, Jim was always there. Not so often Reverend Kelly Miller Smith, but Metz was there, and he passed it along. The only situation where we kind of knocked heads was when we determined we were going to continue the ride, because one of the issues was where we were going to get the money for the tickets. And of course, the adults met in what were the mass meetings that were also held at churches. And for instance, when they did the boycott of the downtown, when they were working on integrating the lunch counters and so forth the previous year, that was both adults and students, and adults frequently were the ones that taxied other people, and so there was kind of mutual support. But the adults had a deal where they needed 2 signatures on a check, and one of the signees seemed to have gone out of town that day and wasn't available to sign a check. And God love her, Diane, did some searching, and there was the cousin of somebody who, I think he was a bookie, literally was the guy that came up with the money for the tickets. In that they were going to use that, lack of funding to keep us, because the adults were afraid for us that we were going to get killed. Dr. King and James Farmer both told us, don't go. It's,
you would never make it through Alabama.
Pardon?
That was Dr. King's position, that you would never make it through Alabama.
That's right. So did James Farmer. Do not continue the ride. And Diane said, not only are we going, we got a bus going. That's what she told Siegenthaler. We were on the bus already.
The trauma that you all experience, what do you actively do to protect your children and your grandchildren, when we talk about these residual effects of trauma?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have been open with my kids and my grandkids. Now I got 2 great-grandkids. I can't talk to them yet because they're too young. I have some biracial grandchildren. I have kids that have been with their buddies, white buddies, and when their car was stopped and he was the only one frisked and had to call nigger coming back from California. So they all know my story. Ann Balsam, if you haven't seen it, wrote a wonderful book on John and myself called The Freedom Riders, John Lewis and Jim Swerg, and looked at our backgrounds of how different we were. And I growing up in an upper middle class home, and John, sharecropper farmer type things with his parents, and yet here we are, seatmates on the bus into Montgomery, and soulmates standing there taking a beating.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
But you talk with them. They know your story, and your story inevitably becomes their story. So it's not our story. Yeah,
my daughter. I think my eldest son doesn't have kids. He is an architect with a fire department in Phoenix. My middle son was married to a Pascoyaki for a while. His first wife, they had the 2 kids. My daughter is the one that had the interracial 3 kids. If you saw my youngest grandson, he's got the biggest staff row I've ever seen right now. But she's a kindergarten teacher and just has such a wonderful gift of love for the kids, and a vast majority of her kids are the children of illegal aliens, believe it or not, because when they learn Ohio is going to do a search or go out, she misses about 2/3 of her class. But my kids have all, I think, taken an understanding of caring and love and concern for others, and have exemplified that in their lives. And for that, I feel very thankful. Are they nonviolent? I don't know.
Okay. I know the engineer want to say something, and I think my last question to you, Jim,
Sure.
is going to deal with, the world today in terms of race. There was just an incident the other day in California involving the Ku Klux Klan and Black Lives Matter.
Right.
We're in the campaign season for the presidential campaign season, and you have what looks like, if I may call it, Hillary Clinton is probably going to be the Democratic
That way.
nominee, and Donald Trump. And so race has the ability to come to the forefront.
Oh, yes.
And maybe I don't know that we have addressed race, or that is going to, surface to the degree that it did back in the 60s, but certainly it looks like that is going to be an issue. So when you look at these contemporary situation, events, circumstances, what happened in California the other day, the Ku Klux Klan, and Black Lives Matter, what do you think? Is it reminiscent? Is it traumatic to see some of these things that happen? Are there certain world events that re-trigger trauma in you?
I won't say they re-trigger trauma. I don't think
Okay.
that. I find it deeply discouraging
Okay.
that there seems to be so many people responding to the negativism.
Okay.
I hated when years ago it used to be when a person ran for office, they were concerned to do something for their constituents and to make our country better. Why was there a civil rights movement? We wanted to make our country better. We didn't throw out platitudes. I'm concerned that there seems a regression to polarization among the races again.
Okay.
It's so sad because as John Lewis was interviewed the other day, and it's been his message, God bless him, we're all one family. We all live in the same house. We're all Americans. And we need to keep that in mind. And we need to remember the positive elements of a family.
Okay.
It's so tragic that there are so many single mothers. I had a son that is a single dad. My daughter has been a single mother for years. And did my grandkids suffer by not having a full family? All I can say is I had a heck of a wonderful upbringing, and I had a mom and a dad. I think it makes a difference, absolutely. Do we take marriage too lightly today? Do we take relationships too lightly? Do we find happiness in a bottle or a syringe? Do we expect that the world owes us a living compared to getting out and getting your hands dirty? I mean, I just don't have all the answers.
I got you.
But I cling, Jermaine, to the final principle of nonviolence, and that is that ultimately, hope is essential to nonviolence, and the anthem "We Shall Overcome." For me, Psalm 127 was the one, or 27, The Lord is my strength and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? And it ends with, I believe I will see the goodness of God in the land of the living.
Wow.
I cling to that. It may not happen in my lifetime. It may not happen in my grandchildren's or great-grandchildren's. But I believe deeply that good will ultimately triumph, that love will overcome hate.
That's powerful.
And that's why I have continued that message. And up until this year, where I physically can't travel like I used to, and you know, to preach or to give a speech just drains me so emotionally and spiritually now. I can give the interviews, but it's time to pass the torch, and it's up. That's one of the things that I tell all the young people. It's your turn now, and you don't have to be part of some national thing. It's those small acts of kindness. Just look around you. Look in your home. Look in your community. Look in your school.
Yeah.
Find something that concerns you.
Yes.
And get involved. Don't wait for somebody else to take that first step. You take that first step.
Gotcha.
And you'd be amazed at the difference you can make in people's lives.
Now, Jim, I know you can't physically get out, but if ever I'm in the Tucson area, can I have lunch with you?
No, because I don't live in Tucson anymore. I live out in the woods in New Mexico now.
Oh, that's right, New Mexico. Well, if I'm in New Mexico in the woods, can we go out?
Absolutely. If you're in the woods, we drive 50 miles to get our groceries.
Oh, wow. Well, we have one person in the studio that just want to share a story with you in terms of how your life has touched his.
Okay.
This has been a very powerful hour for me, Jim, and your testimony is powerful as well. It was very touching, extremely moving, soul-stirring even. It's a high honor and an esteemed pleasure for me to speak with you today, and the warmth within your greeting when I contacted you for this interview, as well as in your conversation and your testimony, it further solidifies the lesson within the story that I'm about to tell. I was so elated when Jermaine posted that you would be on this show last night on Facebook when I saw the picture. 3 out of the 4 families of mine are from deep down south Mississippi, central Mississippi. Holmes County, 30 miles north of Jackson.
Oh boy.
And Belzoni. And I visited frequently as a child. In the 80s, I actually saw, it was like the last of the shanty houses. And
the shotgun houses.
And the shacks, yes. Although we were integrated, I saw whites only signs still sitting up with rust on them, and colored signs near fountains and bathrooms. I was very close to my great-grandfather. I had 4 out of 8 great-grandparents and 1 great-great. I was very blessed. And my great-grandfather, Luke Tate Sr., he was a stern man and he was a strong man. He had 9 girls and 2 boys. And
wow.
They tell stories about him not taking any crap. He married a woman, my great-grandmother, who was the cousin of Emmett Till.
Wow.
So these are stories that I always heard. Yeah. His brother was a councilman who died mysteriously. And the story was he went and got a Tommy gun. And they said, let it alone, Luke. He said, it's let alone, but it won't happen again.
Oh, yes.
And I'm coming to the close with this. There was one story I thought was mythical, but recently I was down there and I found truth in it, that he got word of the Klan coming to lynch him, and he actually met the Klan where they were meeting.
Wow.
And they it's no problem here, Luke. We don't have any problem. So once when I was a young man, maybe about 5 or 6 years old, I heard him speaking to my father. He stayed out in the woods, and whatever the conversation was, he said, I tell you, boy, fella, he called him fella. I tell you, fella, you don't trust a white man as far as you can throw him. But if you happen to find one for a friend, I tell you, you done find you a damn good friend. So a few minutes later, I asked him, Granddaddy, what did you mean by that? and he couldn't quite tell me. I meant what I said, you know. There's no other meaning. He couldn't explain to me. So we went on with our day. Later that night, we were back at the house, and I remember it was very late, and my father had slept, and my great-grandfather walked up to me with a newspaper, a yellow newspaper, and it was the article about the bombing of the Freedom Riders with your picture on it. And he said, "Boy, this is a friend."
Thank you.
And I never forgot that, and it helped me to have healthy interracial relationships growing up. And when I saw your picture last night, it brought warmth and happiness over me, and I've been waiting for this moment all day, and I just want to say thank you. And
thank you. That's one of the nicest things I've heard, and it's the way I've always felt. I never felt that I didn't belong, that I wasn't accepted. We were brothers. We were sisters. We loved one another. We were committed to what we were doing. And the only time anybody said anything about my whiteness was when we got a little old house we were going to make into an office for our central committee, and I agreed to go over and help work on it. And one of the things we needed to do was pull down the ceiling. And there was so much crap up there and dirt. I got it all over me. And the one guy said, "Well, Jim, now you really look like a brother."
Well, you know, Jim, my great-grandfather, had he been living, he would have been 104 years old.
Wow.
That was the age. He told me this 33 years ago. And seeing that I got your number to call you, I'm hoping I can hold on to it and contact you at some time and speak with you, because it will be an extension of my great-grandfather.
Well, thank you. I would be happy to talk with you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, we got to bring this great historic interview to an end, and I definitely want to thank you, Jim Swerk, for taking this time to share your story, to give us advice and give us insight. You were a window into the past, and just thank you, and just for everything you've done for the cause of humanity, not just for black folks, but for humanity. And pray that you'll be well, your family be well, and hopefully we'll get a chance to meet each other in person.
That would be great, Tremaine. Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate the call.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, we're bringing Fresh Start today. Fresh Start today. That's what Fresh Start today. To a close. It's been great. It's been a wonderful time of sharing, and there's a lot of things that we can learn. And somebody might look at the story and say, okay, what was about Fresh Start? I mean, what was it about foster care and social work? It was about interracial relationship. It was about the fight for humanity, about justice and equality. It was about eradicating injustices that exist in government system, in relationships, in communities. It was about the intergenerational connection, you know, the young and old coming together and fighting for for one cause, you know, collective interest above self-interest. It was about dying to yourself and realizing that we all have a responsibility to make the world a better place where we live, the street that we live on, the community that we live on, doing things that Andre Lee Ellis is doing, other great community leaders with Wanda Montgomery and BCDI, and just folks that are doing great, brain, brawn, and body, people who are just trying to make a difference, the wheel from growing power.
Yes.
Will Allen, you know, doing what you can do to make a difference, you know, in child welfare. You know, you see a need, you see injustice, and you confront it head on. That's what we're going to do. About conflict resolution, how to deal with anger and aggression, principles of nonviolence. You know, we all have a responsibility to change the world, to change our families, and ultimately to change ourselves. So thank you for tuning in to Fresh Start today. We'll be back next week, and we should be interviewing with County Executive Chris Abley, and we're going to be talking about child mental health. And so that should be an interesting topic. The following week, we're going to be talking about Wisconsin's cocaine mom law. The cocaine mom law is interesting, these fetal protection laws. So stay tuned to Fresh Start. We'll be back next week. Be well, be safe,